Hello and welcome. I'm Heidi. This is Continuing Education, a podcast for homeschooling families with actually useful information. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. A few weeks ago, I went to a homeschool conference and I presented on working and homeschooling, kind of what that looks like, and what kind of trade-offs that realistically we have to make. I hadn't done any presentations before at a conference, and I was a little hesitant. Wasn't quite sure how many people would be interested. And I was really surprised at how many people came to the session and how many people were engaged and asked questions. And I thought to myself, wow, I feel like there might be a lot of interest in this topic, and it's something that I've been doing for a while. And so I thought maybe I would take that same presentation and share it on my podcast for everybody to have access to. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about working and homeschooling and a realistic look at the trade-offs. So today, I am going to, on homeschoolce.substack.com, I did have a handout that went along with this. So anywhere you see this little pencil mark, that is something that corresponds to the handout. If you want to go and download that PDF, you can kind of walk through this as if you were at the presentation. But this is what we're going to talk about, basically. We're going to talk about a framework for making decisions and kind of allowing yourself to make those decisions without guilt. We're going to talk about some practical systems and tools you can use this week. I actually include just a snippet of this, but it is something that I'm going to get into a little bit more with further podcasts, again, because I thought that there was a lot more interest than I realized there would be. And then third, I'll cover just some job search resources. So if you're still kind of figuring out the work side, I do have some insight into some of the best places to find jobs that are remote or flexible or hybrid that might work better for you. So the first thing to think about as we kind of dive into this presentation is maybe think about, and you can jot this down on a piece of paper, what's your biggest fear about working and homeschooling? And just be real honest with this concept, because we want to be able to revisit that and maybe work through it as you kind of figure out what's going to work for you and your family. I think a lot of what keeps parents or working homeschool parents kind of stuck is not that they're like a scheduling problem, but a perspective problem. We're constantly measuring ourselves against a version of this homeschool life or this working parent life that just doesn't actually exist. And so I wanted to name some hard truths out loud before we kind of even get started. 3 things that I think is hard that nobody talks about, everybody probably knows, but we're not really kind of willing to be, able to say out loud. The first one is the math doesn't math. Like, let's just be honest here. If you're working and you're homeschooling and you're managing a home and relationships and your own wellness, you are attempting full-time jobs, 3 full-time jobs simultaneously. And we're not just talking 3 different tasks, but like 3 full-time workloads. And I think that we all kind of know this, but when we look at other people's Instagram feeds or other people at the co-op, we kind of think everyone else has it together but us. And, I know I find myself thinking, well, gosh, if I were just a little more organized, or if I had better curriculum, or if I finally found the right digital planning system, like somehow I'd make this work with ease. And any one of these things, I'm just going to be honest, if full-time work or homeschool or managing the life and the household and the relationships, any one of those would be a lot. But doing all of them at once is genuinely hard. And I think that the first thing we need to do is acknowledge the weight of what we're carrying, and then that will allow us to carry it better. The social media version of working homeschool is not Pinterest worthy at all times. The real version is, at least for myself and many of the families I know, significantly messier. Hard truth number 2, something's gotta give. When you're working and you're homeschooling, there are going to be some casualties. And I'm listing some of these here, but your casualties may be a little bit different. Maybe your housekeeping standards drop, and you've kind of got to learn to be okay with that. Or if your work gives you any kind of location flexibility or time flexibility, you will probably work in the margins. I work with international clients, so you'll often find me on Zoom at 10 p.m. working with a client, or working later in the evening, especially because I know the next day I might have, some extra school tasks that I need to complete. The other thing is that traditional school schedules won't apply to you. The 9 to 3 model is not your model. Some extracurriculars might not happen, and that means that you and your kids have to prioritize what's really meaningful and what they really want to do. Other things, maybe me time becomes a luxury item and your date nights require military level planning. None of this means that you're a failure. The beauty, though, in all of this is yes, some of these things may fall and you may realize like that's not as important to me right now. The beauty is, though, is that you get to prioritize what works for you. And so today we're going to focus on building a framework that helps you choose those things on purpose so that you can build the life that's authentic to you and best for your family. First, one more hard truth, and that is the guilt will come. There's actual research on this from the Kellogg School of Management. They studied what they called parental identity threat, and that was when a parent's career demands kind of bump up against their identity as a parent. They found that when parents experience that threat, it doesn't just feel bad, it measurably reduces work productivity, it creates shame, and then that spirals on itself. And there's a line from that research that says, and this is specific to mothers, but I think that it's often can be applied to fathers as well, even though I think that society kind of treats mothers differently. But basically, society expects working mothers to mother as if they don't work and work as if they're not mothers. Of course, we want to be available and present and fully on in every role we fill, but we are measuring ourselves against a standard that was never meant to be met. The good news is, though, the same research found that parents with higher emotional stability, so parents who had a clearer framework for who they were and what they were prioritizing, they were largely protected from that shame spiral, and their productivity was unaffected, which is exactly what we're building today, a framework that means that when the guilt shows up for you, you know who you are, what you're standing for, and what you're working towards. Our kids are really watching us do something that's countercultural and hard and real. And it's something a lot of people never attempt, that they think about, but they never actually feel like they can accomplish. But it's a life that's authentic to our family and to our needs. And so it's worth doing if it's something that you really want to do with your family. So today I give you a permission slip to reject perfectionism. It's okay to pick your sacrifices intentionally and then allow yourself to release the guilt around the rest. All right, so let's talk about the framework. This is an actual framework that I use to prioritize the work that I have, the school stuff that I have, the life stuff that I do. Without a framework, I found myself rolling into every chaotic day, kind of making all of my priority decisions in real time, under stress, with no compass, and that really is exhausting. So I wanted to create a framework that allows us to have a feeling where we're not constantly behind, right? Where we feel confident in the decisions that we're making. Setting this framework up before the chaos hits makes the decision process almost automatic when conflict happens. And I think about this framework through a three-legged stool metaphor. So a three-legged stool is inherently stable, but only when all three legs are present. If one leg is too short, the stool, will tip. If one leg is missing entirely, it collapses. The three legs are work, school, and life. And life kind of means everything else. It's the one that many people undervalue the most. But here I'm talking about relationships, your health, self-care, maybe caring for aging parents if you're kind of in that sandwich generation life stage. Your marriage, friendships, the things that make you a person and not just a functional being. And here's how I actually use this framework. So every season, for me, that's roughly every 4 months. I align it to semesters in the summer. I set one priority for each leg. Just one, not a list of tasks and not goals, not a goal sheet. Just one thing per leg that I'm giving focused attention to this season. And then I rank them because then when conflict happens, because conflict I already will know which leg will win that day. So let me show you in practice what this looks like. So these are some of my actual priorities that I've had. While we chat, you can jot down your own priorities that you think might benefit you. So in work, I realized I really wanted to automate more of my workflow and build an actually useful AI strategy. For school, I kind of felt like we'd gotten into a solid academic rhythm, But the social piece floated to the top as a thing that needed attention. So my goal there was to grow social outlets for my kids. And for life, I realized that I was kind of burning out a little bit. And so I needed to figure out a sustainable self care through a hobby. So those were some priorities that I set for myself. I also, when I do this process, I include my kids in this process. Every semester, I sit down with them and I ask, hey, what's going well? What's hard? What do you want to know more about? Are you feeling like you're getting enough interaction with friends and family? And from those conversations, we've made real adjustments over the years. We've added classes or changed class locations or found more hobby materials. We've adjusted our curriculum to better fit their learning needs. Once you set those priorities for the season, the framework will then do its work automatically because when conflict happens, you've already made the decision. You don't have to think it through from scratch in a moment of stress. You just refer back to what you've already chosen, and the decision kind of gets made pretty easily. Now, I do want to talk about this last one a little bit, the life one a little bit more. You may think that this one is a throwaway, and it's not. And I know that some of you, if you're writing down what you would think of your priorities. Maybe you wrote something down and then second guessed it, or you left it blank. And I don't think that this is a throwaway one. I want to talk about it a little bit more intentionally before we move on. I'm going to share mine. So for me, I talked about I needed self-care. I needed to manage my own wellness. I found that I was just really burning out. Doing all of this stuff felt like a lot, and I felt exhausted all of the time. And I realized I needed more ways to fill my cup. And I kind of thought about I've never really had a hobby, and I don't really know what to do with myself. I feel like I always have to be productive. If I have free time, I'm doing something for work, or even if I'm doing something that I enjoy, like I like to read, I feel like I'm wasting time if I'm reading anything but nonfiction that helps me learn, right? So I just have kind of this conflict with myself that I've never really had a hobby that I knew how to just enjoy just because it was fun. And I discovered vanilla extract, and I have gone down the rabbit hole on this thing. When I say I've gone down the rabbit hole, I really mean it. My family can attest that the hole is deep and pricey. I've got about 30 jars of extracts brewing right now, but it's something that brings me joy. It's something that I think about and do just because I like it. I get excited when my vanilla beans, maybe a new variety comes and it hits my mailbox, and I get to go and grab it and smell it, and I'll keep it by my desk and think about, well, geez, what do I want to put it in, and what am I going to use it for when I can, when I can actually make a recipe. I like gifting it to friends. I like making new recipes from all of my creations. It hasn't stopped with just vanilla extract either. I'm down the hole in orange extract and pina colada extract, and I'm doing all kinds of extracts. The point I'm saying in this is that I found something that actually brings me a lot of joy, and I do it just because I'm happy and because it makes me happy to think about and to do. Don't set yourself or your relationships on the back burner. If you're feeling burned from both ends, you do need to find a way to prioritize what brings you joy, because that's what keeps this whole thing afloat. On that note, because I like science and research, I'm going to prove to you how vital this is. There was a 12-year longitudinal study that found that adults who took up a hobby increased their odds of recovering from depression by 272%, which is huge. For people who weren't struggling with depression at the outset, having a hobby reduced their odds of developing it by 32%. Hobbies also specifically buffer against the harmful effects of long working hours, which is totally relatable to us working parents. So do not put this on the back burner because somehow it feels indulgent or you feel guilty for taking the time for yourself. It is the thing that keeps the stool standing. So now let's talk strategies. So kind of once you've got your framework, then you need to build some strategies and tools that will work for you and your family. And I've broken it out into 3 different pieces. There's schedules and routines, building independent learners, and tools and tech. First, we're going to talk about schedules and routines. I think that this is one of the most important ones. Before we dive into that, though, I think it's important to kind of consider a few things. I think that as you kind of consider some of these things, filter everything you hear through these lenses. One is, are all of your kids a fit for homeschooling? That's worth asking honestly. When we first homeschooled, I only homeschooled one of my kiddos and the other one went to public school. where he thrived until he didn't, and we ended up bringing him home. But if you have one kiddo who needs lots of socialization or lots of structure or really loves the traditional school vibe, you have a work schedule that doesn't allow you to facilitate that in any way, including all of your creative workarounds or co-ops or classes, it's worth considering the painful reality that this might not be the right season for homeschooling. Next, as we talk through these things, consider what can you outsource? What's worth paying for? And finally, is there something that you can say no to? I have a real problem that I automatically say yes to everything, and it's been a years long journey to change how I function in that regard. I'll actually give you an example of something. So, I really love to do service projects and service for my community. I used to volunteer for this wonderful organization called Lasagna Love, and basically it's someone who's needing a meal. They request a lasagna if if they need it to be brought to them, and then Lasagna Love assigns it out to a lasagna maker who will make that and take it to them. And I was a lasagna maker, and I was doing this every week. And I got really overwhelmed and I felt burned out. And I messaged Lasagna Love and I said, "Hey, I can't do this right now. You need to put me on pause because this is something I needed to say no to." And they are actually very flexible. They can change your schedule to do this, once a month, that kind of thing. But I felt like that I didn't have the time. I didn't have the capacity to actually make a solid commitment to anything. So I still get their emails from time to time. It's something that I want to do at some point. But it's not something that I'm doing right now because it was something I had to say no to. However, I felt like I still wanted to serve my community. And so I found a local community fridge that I could take food to as kind of on an as needed thing. Like if there were things on sale at the grocery store, I could grab a bunch of them and my kids and I could take it down to the local community fridge. And it was, something that could be done on our schedule because it's open 24/7, and something that would still kind of fill that piece of me that wanted to serve my community. So take stock of the things that you're doing, the things that you have said yes to. Are there things that you need to say no to kind of alleviate your load? And if yes, are there things that maybe you don't want to get rid of, but you could do in a different way? To kind of still fulfill that need. Those are things that are worth considering. So let's talk about specific strategies. And the best strategy is going to be the one that depends entirely on how you work. I think about working parents in 4 categories based on 2 factors. The first one being, are you home or are you away? Or is your schedule fixed or flexible? And I'm not going to spend extensive time on each of these categories because I think the strategies that we'll talk about you can kind of fit in based on what's best for you. I know homeschoolers who have made every single one of these work. I have known, nurses who put in 3 12-hour shifts. They had to be out of the house. I have known people who work from home, but they take phone calls. I've even known a road schooling family who picked an online curriculum that they could do on the road with when their kid went with their dad truck driving, and then when they came home they could pick it back up. So these strategies can be kind of implemented where you see best. I think that if homeschooling really is something that you want to do, you could probably, I feel like 95% of the people I talk to can make a way to make it happen. So let's talk about some of these schedules and routines that might be beneficial. The first thing is schedules and routines and knowing the difference, right? I know this may seem obvious, but a schedule and routine are not the same thing. And this clicked for me several years ago. And when I started implementing it and I started implementing more routines, it genuinely changed how I structured our day. A schedule is time-based. It's what happens when. School at 9, lunch at noon, calls at 2, right? It's fixed to the clock. But a routine is action-based. It's what happens in what order. You wake up, you get dressed, you eat breakfast, you start math, right? Whenever that time happens, the sequence happens, right? So regardless of the time, the sequence begins. Why does this matter? Because schedules break. So if your meeting gets moved or a client calls early or your kid has a meltdown at 8:15 and you have a meeting at 8:30, your whole day is schedule dependent. One disruption unravels everything. But routines, they're flexible. Your kiddos can follow their morning routine whether it starts at 7 or 8:30 because they know, hey, after lunch, I'll finish math, or I get to do science after lunch. The order is doing the work here and not the clock. Research, in fact, consistently shows that routines have positive effects on children's mental health, academic achievement, and behavior. So, whereas the schedule can break, routines are consistent, and research actually shows when the brain doesn't have to constantly guess what's next, it shifts out of stress mode and into learning mode. And that's what a routine does. It kind of removes the cognitive overhead of uncertainty so your kids can actually focus. This is especially key if you have neurodivergent kiddos who need structure, but you need the flexibility. So the sweet spot is to use schedules for non-negotiables, things like work meetings, appointments, anything that can't flex, and then use routines for everything else because that will give your family the predictability without the rigidity. Here's how I manage schedules and routines. I anchor my week around the non-negotiables, my work hours, field trips, social opportunities, and key curriculum tasks that I know that I want to do together with my family. This is an actual checklist that I have used in the past with my kids where I have anchored their morning tasks at the beginning. So when they first wake up, they do those tasks. Then they can review their appointments that they have for the day. So they know like, hey, at 9:30, we need to go to the doctor. At 11 o'clock, I have a scheduled class. They know what to do. And then at the bottom, I've got the things that they need to do to check off to finish for the day. That's their checklist. They can do it in the order that it's there. They can do it in another order if they want to. When they were littler, I did give them a little bit more structure in how I did this, but as they've gotten older, this is how I kind of put it into place, is that gives them the flexibility. Once the schedule is in place, you can hand this routine over to your kids, and that's where things like this checklist become your best friend because they have the flexible open-ended tasks, the ones that don't have a set time, they go on this checklist and then they can survive disruptions. They flex when your day doesn't go as planned, and it gives your kids a little bit of that freedom to be able to choose what they want to do when they want to do it. The goal here is not to just copy my schedule. This is not the perfect plan for you. It's an example of what I did so that you can find what's perfect for you. It's to find a structure that actually will work in your life. And maybe that maybe something like this. It may be like, hey, I don't want to put too much on one day. Maybe you want every Friday off because you just want to have a 3-day weekend. So you do year-round schooling to lighten your daily load. Maybe it's 3 days of work in the evening rather than doing it during the working day because you know that you've got too much work that you've got to accomplish during the day. So they do their free time, their playtime during the day and school in the evening. More working parents are homeschooling now than ever before, and there's no single right model. So the key here is to really find something that will work for you that allows you that one-on-one attention with you and your kiddo. I recommend including fun things in your schedule. So if you have the flexibility of location for your work, you can kind of input this into your routine. Find your local kid-friendly places with Wi-Fi. I'm sharing with you my list. For example, Chuck E. Cheese, they have a summer pass that's worth investing in if that's your plan. If you have something like an Urban Air or another trampoline park near you, they often have Wi-Fi, it's air conditioned, and kids can play while you sit and work because they have tables. If your work is more out and about, are there ways you can maybe school on the go? Are there audiobooks or podcasts that you can do? This last year, we did this between classes at the co-op where my kids took classes. I kind of stupidly scheduled one kid for a class in the morning and one kid for a class in the afternoon, and it's a long drive, and so I knew that it wasn't realistic to go back and forth throughout the day. So I took both kids, we did one class in the morning, and then in the middle, we'd go to lunch and we'd listen to an audiobook while they read along with their book, and we'd discuss it, and we'd have lunch and enjoy some time together before the other kid went to their class. Similarly, that car time is school time. So, we would listen to podcasts to and from school, or maybe a verbal narration curriculum. We actually love Curiosity Chronicles for this one. One semester we did history on Fridays at McDonald's. Basically, McDonald's offers free fries on Friday. We would listen to it on the way. We would chat about it while we're eating our fries, and then we would drive home. And that counted. It all counts. That's all school. You can find clever and creative ways to do it while still getting out of the house, if and within your schedule, right? I knew I had a lunch break. That's when I was going to do it. So we drive on Fridays to go do that together. The last thing that I'll talk about in terms of this scheduling and routine things before we kind of move on is it's important to get on the same page as your spouse. So when one person is both the worker and the teacher, your division of labor resentment can live here if you don't talk about it. This happened with myself and my spouse, is that I felt like I was drowning a little bit, and I kind of just broke down one time when he came home from work because he was working out of the house. And to be honest, I shouldn't have waited that long to talk to him about it. And so the more you can be upfront about how you're going to divide and conquer and who covers what and what good enough looks like and how you'll communicate, don't wait until you're drowning. And I'm in our home, I'm the primary homeschooler, but there are times when I ask my husband to step in. Maybe I'm traveling for work, or I just need a break, or I can't manage the driving, or I hit a point where I'm just not an effective teacher anymore, like math. I'm no good at math. That's when I say, hey, I need you. Can you do this portion? And what that looks like in our house is like, yes, every Wednesday he takes a kid to class, or hey, when they hit algebra, he knows that he's the guy, because I'm not math friendly. I don't like math, and I don't know how to teach it well, but he's phenomenal at math, and so he becomes the math teacher, and our schedule adjusts to accommodate that, right? Like he works a more scheduled job and gets off at a certain time, and therefore he does math right after. And so things will have to change, but get on the same page as your spouse so that you both understand what it's taking to do homeschool, and kind of what's required to make sure that your kids get the education that they deserve. All right, now let's move on to building independent learners. This is the bucket that will save your sanity long term. Building independent learners for me is not about leaving your kids to kind of fend for yourselves or for themselves. It's about setting them up so they can move forward without you hovering. One of the things that working homeschool parents worry about most when I chat with families around me is whether or not their kids are getting enough instruction time, enough attention, enough rigor. I want to reassure you a little bit. Research shows that homeschool kids perform better than those in institutional schools. They score between 15 and 25 percentile points above public school students on standardized tests, regardless of their parents' level of education or household income. So whether homeschool parents were ever certified teachers is not notably related to their children's academic achievement. But this is what's really interesting, is that the research on independent and self-directed learning also points in that same direction. Students who develop the skills to drive their own learning don't just do better academically. They develop things like time management, resilience, resourcefulness that serve them into adulthood. I'm constantly trying to get my kids to feel excited and motivated and I don't know the right word, but I want them to take charge of their own education, because that will allow them to build upon it when they do get old enough that they do have to advocate for themselves, or they have to make decisions that are bigger in life, and they're deciding what they want to do. So building independent learners is not just about kind of letting them fend for themselves. It's giving them like a rock solid foundation to build upon for their whole life. So the key here with your schedules and routines is to now make those visible in a way that works for your kids. So we kind of showed you the checklist that I used before, but there are also lots of other ways you can do this. So you can use the checklist. You can use visual anchor charts in the house near where routine takes place. So for example, in their morning routine can be posted in the bathroom and in their room to help them keep on task. My kids are a little bit older now, and they have their own devices. So we have shared calendars so they can see it on their phone. And we have a TV that mounts in the hall, and it displays the schedule, the dinner that I have planned, the weather, the date, and the time. The benefit of this is that your kids will stop asking what's next every 5 minutes. This also reduces decision fatigue for you and will build upon their ability to manage their own schedule. Those executive function skills that are really hard for a lot of kids, they'll be able to put that into practice. So when my kids ask, like, hey, what are we having for dinner tonight? I refer them to the calendar where they can see what we're having for dinner tonight. And this creates that predictability without being rigid, and allows you to kind of focus your attention on the things that actually matter rather than the minutia of the day to day. Now, how you do this, totally up to you. Like I said, you can do it on a whiteboard. You can use picture cards. You can use a checklist. You can use a display, like I have a TV in our hallway. For us, we like to color code everything. So I've got things, anything that's for one kid is one color, everything that's for another kid is another color. But you can use it in a way that's most effective for you. The key is to get it up, teach them how to use it, and then refer to it when they have questions. A couple other things that you can do to kind of prep your kids for independent work or to become independent learners is one is prep independent work. I've got a few different ideas here. So one, morning boxes, so you can have a container or folder with their first few tasks already laid out. This allows you maybe to go do some work and they know exactly where to go in the morning. Their morning routine includes, brushing their teeth, getting dressed, having breakfast, and going to the morning box. And that kind of buys you a little morning time to do some work, say good morning, while they know exactly what to do and you're not having to corral or get them to do anything right away. Maybe it's got things like worksheets or reading assignments or something creative that they can do without asking. It kind of gives them a launching point. But the other reason for this morning boxes that I particularly love is that it also gives you a good data point for figuring out what draws your kid in. So in our morning boxes, I would put, when they were littler, they don't do morning boxes now, but when they were littler, elementary school, early middle, I would put a variety of things in their morning boxes, and then I would observe what they routinely picked. And that helped me better understand their learning style. What were they excited about? Did they want to build things? Did they want to read things? Did they want to listen to something? I got to learn more about my kids just by observing how they interacted with the morning boxes. Um, Another thing is the gift bag strategy, so the surprise gifts. This is actually something that my sister did many, many years ago that I thought was so brilliant that I continued it, and I still do it now. My sister I had a particularly rough season. I was having to take a lot of work calls, and my kids were little, and they didn't play independently very easily. And so while I could take work calls and then they could hang out in the room with me, it was just really tough. So she went to the dollar store and she found a whole bunch of activities that they could do. I'm talking like activity books or, toys or projects, craft kits. I mean, she had like 20 different things that she had purchased. And then she wrapped them and she gave them to me all wrapped up in wrapping paper. And she basically just said, hey, these are gifts for the kids. Whenever there's a rough day, take one out. And it was the most brilliant thing because it was something brand new that got them excited and they got along when they did it together. So I would pull out a box when I needed a moment, and they would play very happily exploring this new concept, this new gift, right? They were just excited about it. And sometimes it gave me 30 minutes and sometimes it gave me much longer. But the point is that it was something new, it was exciting, it was something they could rely on. So even now, I will buy clearance, if I'm going through the store and I see clearance craft kits or I see a book that, I think that they might like, I'll pick up kind of random things that I think they might like, and then I'll hold it in the closet to get out when sometimes the day gets dull. They're a lot older now, they're a lot more independent. But you need a little surprise sometimes, or when you want to just have a moment that just feels fun and exciting. So I still do that today. The second thing is in building out these independent learners and helping them learn those schedules and routines is to outsource the signals. And so first, teach the signals. So what does it mean when you're free versus when you need to work? So if you're working and you know that, every once in a while you're going to have to take a client call and you need them to be able to read on their own and be a little more independent, what does that look like? Does that look like you putting a sign up? Does that look like you closing a door for a moment if they're old enough to be in another room with the door closed? What does that look like? So teach the signals, and then teach them the signals or outsource the signals for transitions. The reason for this is so that you don't have to be thinking about it. So for example, if if every day at 2 o'clock you want your kids to switch from one task to the next task, rather than you looking at the clock waiting for it to be 2 so you can go tell them that we need to switch to a different task or we need to get ready for a doctor's appointment, can you use something like your smart device, your Google device, your whatever your home speaker is, to automate that transition and reminder? For many years, I wanted my kids to start kind of getting away from schoolwork or play or whatever they were involved in, and I wanted them to do chores every day. And so at 4 o'clock, our smart device said, "Hey, it's 4 o'clock. It's time to do our chores," and they would stop what they're doing, kind of come up to a finishing point, and dive into the chores that I needed them to do. And that meant that you didn't have to be thinking about it all the time. You don't have to be looking at the clock. When you yourself hear that, you can do the signal that you need. Okay, so when the timer for chores goes off, hey, does that mean that 4 o'clock happens and you're done for work for now and you can start prepping, dinner? So those are some things that you can do to kind of allow them to learn the signals to transition from one thing to the next, or to have reminders for things, and that takes it off your mental plate, and allows your mind to work on other things that your mind is working on. You've got 100 things, you took one thing off. The third thing is that as your kids become more independent, I recommend building on teaching mastery and not busy work. I actually recommend this even when they're younger, but I don't look at curriculum and assume, hey, if there are 10 worksheets here, we have to do all 10 worksheets. Once my kiddo masters a concept, we move on and we leave the busy work behind. This allows us to move at a pace that meets our abilities. It also prevents my kids from delaying their schoolwork because they think it's boring or painful. And it allows us to not waste on time on something that they already know, and it gives us more flexibility when we hit those challenging parts. So when my kids were, when we first brought one of our kiddos home, we told him, like, hey, you should know, like, homeschool is not easy. In fact, homeschool is going to be difficult all the time, because once you master something, we're moving on to something else for you to learn something else. So there's not going to be time for you to kind of like, what happened in school is that he would learn something and then he would have 2 weeks that he was bored. We don't do that in homeschool. Once we learn something, we move on. So there's not a lot of busy work. And what that allows us to do, though, is really to have a lot of flexibility with that. When challenging things hit, we don't feel bad, like we're getting behind. Or if we need to take a little bit of time, maybe we're all feeling burned out and we all need to play hooky and go to a water park for the day or something. Like, that gives us the flexibility to do that without feeling bad about it. Now let's talk about tech and tools. And this was the part that I got so many questions on, and I realized there was a lot of interest in learning more about this. So I will be doing more of this in a later podcast. But the first concept is to find an ecosystem, and then the second concept will be to define your workflow. So the goal of an ecosystem, and I've listed some here, but the goal here is that it lets you capture everything and parse it out and not allow things to fall through the cracks. So this can be pen and paper. It can be a shared whiteboard, or it can be digital tools. I'm a big digital person. I like Apple. We're an Apple family. It doesn't matter which you choose as long as it actually gets used. So choose the system with the least friction and not the most features. Whatever you choose, make sure that your kids have access to the relevant pieces. So they can see, like, they know when you're free. They see what's on your calendar, what you've got scheduled. They can manage their own reminders. That's kind of part of building their independence. So when they say, like, hey, Mom, I really need to remember I had one kid who wanted me to remind him when he got his allowance, he wanted to put away a certain amount of money for savings. Well, that's something that I taught him. Hey, you know what? You can find your own ecosystem, right? Like, would a sticky note help you remember? We kind of talked through that, but we ended up putting it in his Apple reminders because that would pop up on his phone and he knew that he would remember that. As a working homeschool parent, you're managing things, you need to do for work. You're finding curriculums that you want to look into. You've got recipes that you want to make for dinner. And so how many of you might take screenshots just to never go back to use them, or have an endless Pinterest board? That's the goal of the ecosystem. And the reason that I like to choose one ecosystem rather than choosing like Google Calendar for one thing, but then Apple Notes for something else, when you keep it in the same ecosystem, they play nicely to each other and they're easier to use with each other. So here's here an example of that is you can add a reminder in Apple and then it will appear on your calendar. That's not going to be the same if you have one thing from one ecosystem and another tool from another ecosystem. So the ecosystem is kind of designed to be a holistic place where you can capture all that information that you're thinking about and that you're working on. And here's how I use my ecosystem. So like I said, we're an Apple family and I use all the built-in Apple tools. And I live in Apple Reminders. The thing that made it actually work was giving everything a home. So I have dedicated lists for books I want to read, or family activity ideas, or homeschool ideas, or work tasks, right? I have them all listed out. And when I'm scrolling, or if I'm out and about, when I see something, I can add it to the list that it's applicable to so it doesn't fall off my plate. Or when I take a screenshot of a recipe, I can add it to my recipe list. This was an example of this on here was I came across this fun field trip idea. Well, I used a built-in Apple feature, which is to share it to my list, to add it to my family activities ideas list. So now whenever I want to do something as a family, I'll go to our family activities list and I will be able to know exactly some ideas that I pulled out. I won't forget about it. It won't be hovering in my mind. If there's a curriculum resource that someone mentions, it goes on the list. Or if there's a book recommendation, it's on the list. It takes 5 seconds. I don't feel like I'm losing information because the volume of things coming at a homeschool parent is massive. And without a system, it just becomes like noise and clutter, and you're constantly scared of what ball you're going to drop. So if you add it to a list and then you review the list, you're less likely to drop that piece of information. At the end of the day, I actually will do a brain dump. So things that I have floating around in my head, that goes into my brain dump list. It doesn't matter what list that's eventually going to go to. My goal is before I go to bed, I just want to write down all the things I'm thinking about, because just knowing that it's written down is actually what allows me to rest. I know that I don't have to keep thinking about it throughout the evening. I can go to sleep. So the next morning, I will then sort it and organize it. I'll assign it to the right list. I'll schedule it in my task to do. Or if I realize, I don't need to be worried about this, I'll delete it. And that's the whole system. Basically, capture everything, sort it once, and then trust that information is there. The goal, again, is not a perfect productivity setup. It's just a system that clears your mind so you can be present at work and then at home. For me, I needed to reduce the number of things I'm actively thinking about, because that allowed me to be free for the tasks that I needed to do in the moment, that I couldn't hover and think about 10 things that I needed to do at home when I'm doing my work. I needed to be able to assign it somewhere so that I knew that I could come back to it. Now, the key with this then, of course, is that you do need to revisit this. Writing it down and shoving it to the side like I do with Pinterest does me no good. So this means that when I actually am ready to plan my grocery list, I come to my recipes to try list and I say, are there any things here that I want to do? Are there any meal prep things that I set aside that I thought looked good and that I can go through? Then you can build a workflow around that concept, which actually is what we're going to talk about. So once you have that ecosystem, you can start to consider your own workflow. And I once listened to a podcast that talked about how so many things happen on a cycle, like laundry, right? There's a cycle or rotation that takes place. You wash the laundry, you fold the laundry, you put the laundry away. And while the frequency may change, that same cycle occurs over and over again. The concept of a system is taking those cycles and finding a more holistic system that allows that cycle to take up less brain power to complete. So the key here is to find your own routines and workflows that will simplify your life. When you're homeschooling, running a home, juggling work too, the problem is that you probably have too many small decisions to make every day, and it's terribly exhausting. So instead, look at all the recurring tasks or cycles that you have in your life and ask, can this be turned into a system, a checklist, a prompt, a routine, or an automation instead of having to make that fresh decision every time? Can I use my ecosystem to solve some of this problem for me? I'm going to give an example here because meals are one of the clearest places to build a low friction system, and it's one that probably occupies way too much time in our minds. But this mindset applies to everything: laundry, lesson planning, errands, grocery ordering, work admin, transitions, even car time, right? The key is to reduce the number of times you have to stop and think, what are we eating? Do I have the ingredients? And when am I supposed to deal with this? So I put our meal schedule on our shared calendar so kids know what we're having and when to expect it. And then I will put prep activities for that. So if I know that we're having chicken on Thursday, I'm going to take the chicken out on Tuesday. I'm going to put that on my calendar. Take out chicken, right? And then, if I know that I need, if we've got football practice, I make sure that I plan a crock pot meal on football practice days. And then I will put on the calendar at 8 a.m., hey, put dinner in the crock pot. That way it's not forgotten. I either put that on the calendar or the task list that appears on my calendar. Whatever works for you, you can do. But the point is that you're not going to hold that in your mind. You're not going to sit there all day long and think, okay, I need to make sure I take out the chicken today because we're having chicken on Thursday. Or you're not going to wake up, forget to put the food in the crock pot, and then by 2 o'clock realize what you've done and have to order out and spend money that you probably don't want to spend. So the goal is to not hold it in your mind. That way you can be fully present in the moment that you're in, whether you're working or you're doing school stuff or just in general life. All right. Finally, if you're not in the work situation you want, or you're trying to figure out how to get there, I will talk about this briefly. Just it's where I started. When I started working, I actually started my first job. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I actually had someone reach out to me in a Facebook group, in a mom Facebook group, and say, "Hey, I like the way you communicate. I like the way you talk to people. Would you be interested in a job?" It was a mutual friend, but it was someone that I didn't know, had never met them. And so opportunities can lurk everywhere. Community matters enormously. And so even if you don't have your ideal situation or you don't get it on the first try, just know that there is hope. Some of the best resources I found are right here. So I followed all of these websites over the years. They post legit jobs. A lot of them do offer paid subscriptions, but I found that if you sign up for their social media or their newsletters, they will offer plenty of leads just from that information without you having to pay for it. I do caution you to be careful when you're looking for remote jobs or hybrid jobs. There are a lot of scams out there in the flexible workspace. So if something feels off, it probably is. Like, you shouldn't ever have to pay to get an interview or to get a job. I do also mention that the 3 at the bottom here on where to look, if you are an educator, because I know that we have a lot of homeschooling families who have educator parents, or they have an education degree, you may find your success in ed tech jobs. That industry is booming right now. Those bottom 3 websites are worth bookmarking and following. The other place that I think you may have some success is following curriculums and homeschool communities that you love. I often see so many homeschool businesses posting jobs, and they're looking specifically for people engaged in their communities or who are using your curriculum. So that's something worth exploring as well. And then, of course, who do you know? Like I said, I found my first work from home job simply because I wasn't even looking for it. They just reached out to me and asked if I would be interested. So it's worth being nice to the people around you, I guess. Finding the perfect remote, flexible role can take time in the trenches. There are a lot of jobs that hire remotely, but you kind of got to prove yourself capable of being a self-starter and working independently. So if you don't find your perfect role right away, don't give up. You might come across it, with a little bit of time. I want to close with something that I kind of asked you at the beginning. If you look down at what you wrote, your biggest fear about working and homeschooling, I'll be honest, I'm not in your room sitting next to you. I don't know what you wrote, but I would guess that it's something in the range of I'm going to fail my kids, or I'm not going to be good enough at this, or I'm going to drop something that's important, or I'm not going to be able to sustain it. And here's what I want to leave you with. You don't have to do it all. You just have to do the next right thing. You don't have to peak in all three legs at once, right? You don't have to peak at the work and the life and the school all at the same time. You don't have to have the perfect curriculum or the perfect schedule or the perfect plan. You really just need a framework. Just set yourself one priority per leg this season, and then kind of come up with what you need to know for your floor for a hard week. So what's a satisfactory school week look like for you? And it's okay if sometimes you just meet that threshold. And you need something that's yours, some version of 30 jars of vanilla extract brewing in your kitchen that reminds you that you are a person and not just a functional being. Give yourself grace. I don't mean that as a platitude, but what you're building, this life where you work and you teach and you parent and you try to stay whole, is genuinely hard, and you're doing it anyway. You can absolutely do this, and you don't have to do it alone. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this, I would love to know your thoughts. Well, either way, even if you didn't enjoy it, I'd love to know your thoughts. Please visit me on homeschoolce.substack.com. I would love to know more about what you'd be interested in. Was there a particular piece of this that you'd be interested in learning more about? Thank you so much.